I am very pleased tonight to introduce Hala Jaber, who was born in West Africa, grew up in Lebanon, apart from a spell at a British boarding school, poor thing. She began her career in journalism at the Associated Press news agency in Beirut. For the past few years, Hala has been a correspondent with the Sunday Times. She covered the invasion of Iraq. She was, I think, one of the only journalists in Falluja at the time of the siege, when it was occupied by Sunni militants and sympathizers of Al-Qaeda and surrounded by the Americans. She twice won Foreign Correspondent of the Year, and in 2007 she won the Martha Gellhorn Prize for journalism. Hala lives in London and has lived here for some time. Her book, The Flying Carpet to Baghdad, which I just read this weekend and is a real page-turner, so I thoroughly recommend that, is the story of how she tried to save two small Iraqi girls whose family had been killed during the invasion by an American missile strike. So I was very struck by the conditions that you describe in Baghdad at that point. You're driving round with Steve, your husband, who's a photographer, in very dangerous conditions, going round the hospitals where even the doctors are carrying AK-47s.
Yes, it was just immediately after the fall of Baghdad and the ousting of Saddam. I mean, the city seemed to have gone on a rampage, basically, of looting everything, down to the most, you know, to the simplest thing, to the nail and the doorknob and the window. So nothing was immune, not even hospitals. So they were even going into hospitals and looting hospitals. So very few hospitals were left, if you want, with their facilities. And those that were, the doctors took it upon themselves to have guards outside, and for them to be carrying Kalashnikovs inside, because they were worried about the looters coming in, and they still had patients to deal with.
You all were already observing certain militias taking up positions on street corners, and it said, and you said it reminded me of Beirut just before the civil war broke out, which was clearly very prescient.
It was bizarre because there were tiny signs. You know, suddenly all these groups of people came back to Iraq from exile and from within, and you found, you know, a little house here, and there's a sign up saying, you know, I don't know, the party of this, that, or the other. All these names were coming up, popping up, you know, or political parties, democratic parties, I don't know what parties. And it very much looked like Lebanon before, because suddenly, you know, everybody was popping up, and you could see, like, well, I was in my mind flashing back and thinking, okay, this is the beginning. Then they form into militias, and then militias get armed, and then militias are fighting each other for territory or power or influence. And you're in a civil war. So we're driving, looking at all this, and in the middle of all this, there was looting. In the middle of all this, there's chaos. There's arms on the street. You don't know anymore who's who. And driving along, you don't even know whether this neighborhood is now under this control or that control. So all of these were like flashbacks for me from Beirut times. And I looked at Steve and I said, my God, this is like Beirut. We're going to have civil war here very soon.
So you find your poster girl, and which is a horrible way of putting it, but for Zahra becomes the face of the Sunday Times campaign appeal. But she's very, very ill, and she has to be got out of the hospital and into a facility where they can deal with burns. So, I mean, tell us how you then go about that, because I mean, you've got your job as a journalist. You've got to write your story about Zahra. The photograph is taken. The campaign is launched. But in the meantime, you have to deal with the organisation of getting this very sick little girl into a better hospital.
It wasn't easy, because I mean, when I looked at Zahra, something in me, I think, snapped as well. It was an accumulation of a lot of things. Obviously, also having spent 3 months there throughout the war, and seeing lots of other children being hurt, damaged, killed, injured, crying, and all of these had, you know, aside from the journalist side of things, they also had a personal effect on me. So Zahra was, if you want, the last straw for me. And I felt, and throughout the war, I kept on thinking I wanted to help these kids. If only I could, if only I could get them out, if only I could save them, if only I could protect them, you know, crazy thoughts in your mind. So when it came to finally Zahra, I felt like, okay, if only I could help this one child. Marla had did what we had failed in 48 hours to try and do for Zahra, and somehow managed to get Zahra out of there into the field hospital together with 2 other seriously burnt women that were in the same ward with Zahra at the time.
Now, I should say that what makes this story even more poignant, as you indicate in the reading, is that you had spent nearly 10 years trying to have a baby, and I think any woman who has struggled, or any family, I should say, has struggled with the issue of infertility will really relate to this book, because it is, it is an incredibly painful thing, as any woman knows who's tried to have a child, and so this makes it much more of a difficult story for you to cover, doesn't it? Because you're part of you wants to adopt this child and take her home with you.
Yeah, it was the hardest thing. I mean, I thought after years and years and years of trying, and then losing the plot over not being able to, and then finally trying to accept what my mother told me all the time. It's not in your hands, it's in God's hand. Let it be, Hala. Don't challenge, just accept and move on. So it took 10 years for me to be able to move on. And then when I did, I thought I'd put all that behind me, and that I would accept his final judgment, if you want, or decision for me, that you are meant to be somebody without children, even though I could not accept or didn't understand. So when I came, and by the time I got to Iraq, I had been doing this for a couple of years and doing my mattress stuff and the stories I wanted to do, and proving myself again as a journalist. So I thought, I was over all this and I could handle it. But I suppose the one thing and I've learned since also, that it's not something that one handles and just disappears. You never know when you turn a corner and it's waiting for you, and it does wait for you, because as much as you say you accept it, you don't really, deep inside you don't totally accept it. You just learn to live with it, and you just accept that it's not going to be, so you make the best out of the situation and you move on. So I had moved on, and then I'm faced with these 2 little girls. They needed me then more than anything else, because they'd lost everything. So I started thinking, yes, it was crazy quick, but I was thinking seriously that these 2 girls, I have to adopt them, I have to help them, and I should. And even though I won't be able to do what I should, to be the perfect mother for them, or the full mother. And I wasn't thinking, to be honest, at that point as a journalist, and I know we are journalists, but sometimes we forget the title, we are journalists, doesn't mean that we are inhuman and without emotions and without feelings, and we don't react or interact. We try and be objective a lot, and we are up to a point. But there are moments, and I always ask myself whether I'm right or wrong. With hindsight, I now think, well, I'm glad I am. There's no right or wrong. I'd rather be somebody who reacts sometimes and maybe cross the line, and I did cross the line, because suddenly I wasn't thinking as a journalist.